Hello, my name is Rebecca Ray, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to this edition of Off the Shelf, a book discussion series brought to you by the Conference Board. Today I'll be sitting down with Carly Fiorina to discuss her latest book, Find Your Way. So today I'll be speaking with Carly Fiorina, who's the former chairman and CEO of Hewlett Packard, and the very first female CEO of a Fortune 50 company. Since leaving HP, Carly served as chairman of Good 360, the world's largest product philanthropy organization, and as chairman of Opportunity International, a Christian-based organization that lifts millions out of poverty around the globe through microfinance. In 2008, she founded the One Woman Initiative in partnership with then Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice to engage and empower women through increased access to economic opportunity. Currently, Carly Fiorina Enterprises and the Unlocking Potential Foundation. Through those two organizations, Carly and her team sharpen problem-solving and leadership skills across America. So I have the pleasure of talking about her new book. She's going to be drawing on her own leadership journey, some of the remarkable things that she's done and the firsts that she's responsible for, as well as wisdom gleaned from 4 decades in the workplace. We'll talk a little bit about choosing a path over a plan, about using problem solving as a way to propel yourself and your organizations forward, to overcome fear and procrastination, make smart decisions, and ultimately use your power for good. So it's a great pleasure, and I want to welcome you, Carly. Thank you for carving out some time to be with us today.
Well, thank you so much, Rebecca. I'm really looking forward to our conversation. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure, and congratulations on your new book. I hope it is a bestseller again, and I enjoyed reading it, and I just appreciate a few minutes to selfishly talk about some of the things that really resonated with me.
I look forward to
it. Well, good. So here's my first question. You talk a lot in the book, in fact, maybe it's one of the frames, if you will, about a path versus a plan, and using one of them as sort of a compass or North Star. So how does choosing a path better serve us?
So it's such a counterintuitive thing to say, because, of course, particularly in an organizational setting, everybody has plans, right? You set goals, you create plans to achieve those goals. Planning is part of achieving results. And so when I talk about a path over a plan, it's initially very confusing to people. And what I'm talking about is the journey of life as opposed to accomplishing organizational results. And in the journey of life, having observed many people's lives as well as my own, a path is more productive than a plan. And let me illustrate what I mean. In corporate America, I ran into all kinds of people who looked at the ladder, the corporate ladder in front of them, and said, okay, I need a plan to climb the ladder. And so they would say to themselves, I have to be at this level by this age. I need to be making this much money by this age. You see kids graduate from high school or college, and they have all these milestones laid out in their minds, which frequently revolve around a particular position, a particular level of pay, a particular external accomplishment. And what I've observed happens is, number one, people may never achieve that plan that they laid out. And that inevitably leads to great disappointment and sometimes cynicism and disengagement. Or number two, they achieve their plan, but what they have to sacrifice and give up to get there turns out to be more than they feel they should have sacrificed. Or the third thing that happens is they get there and it's not what they thought it would be. And along the way, I've observed that people who are myopically focused on achieving a particular plan miss a whole lot of opportunities that are all around them. And they miss as well the opportunity for growth, for engagement with others, and they end up not growing as much as they might have had they chosen a path instead, a path that focuses on how do I unlock my own potential and how do I help others unlock theirs?
It's to me just such an interesting concept. I think I look at my own life and I'm exquisitely prepared for a career that didn't happen. And yet, and so great, check that box. But things that have come along in my life that were greater things, more interesting things than I probably planned originally. So maybe that's the better philosophy to have, is to be open to possibilities and to new adventures, because sometimes what's in store for you is greater than you would have thought.
Well, exactly right, Rebecca. And, I had this plan for my life too. I was going to go to law school. I was going to be a lawyer. My plan, in a way, I'm very grateful for this, but my plan blew up so quickly. And, here I am, unemployed and a law school dropout and a medieval history major working as a secretary in a 9-person real estate firm. It wasn't the plan. And yet, what I've also found from that secretarial position all the way to becoming a CEO is, and I tell young people this all the time, whatever job you have, do the best job you can. Do it with excellence, and people will pay attention to that. And then opportunity will knock, and you'll have an opportunity that you might not have expected. And so then you got to be brave enough to answer the call. I think it's an incredibly important lesson. And I also think, honestly, and people like this, that people who get so hung up on their plan, it's not just that they miss opportunities, but in too many cases, they give up things along the way that they regret later.
Well, that's true. I think there's only so much satisfaction that comes from having an inbox that is up to date. So I've given that up a long time ago. But a lot of the things that you get so focused on begin to serve as blinders, right? I think your point about opportunity is it's one thing to have an opportunity present itself, and it's another to have you recognize it, and it's another to actually do something with it, so that the forces behind or the people who've offered you that opportunity never regret having given you one. So it's what do you do with it once you find it's in your frame of consciousness, right?
Absolutely. And by the way, it's one of the reasons that I talk so much about fear in my book and how to learn courage, because what I see happening so often is people don't pursue an unexpected opportunity. Sometimes they don't pursue it because it's not on their plan, but very frequently they don't pursue it because they're afraid of it. And they're afraid maybe they won't measure up, or they're afraid they don't know where it's going. Fear, it turns out, is very common and extremely debilitating for people when confronting an opportunity for problem solving, for growth of an organization. And so there are many people who, when presented with an opportunity, unfortunately, there are many organizations, when presented with an opportunity, fail to see it.
Yep. I think that's true. I think it's true for people. It's true for companies. And, it's often said that the regrets you have are the things you didn't try, as opposed to the times when you might have tried for something and not hit whatever you thought success looked like. So.
Well, and I think, it's a particularly relevant thing in this time of crisis. I mean, companies are facing many crises, and we all know that within every crisis are real opportunities. And I think frequently, particularly in difficult times, that fear of pursuing the opportunity can, for companies, separate winners from losers over time.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. I think those companies that, were perhaps struggling or maybe not as forward thinking or as agile or innovative, or use whatever term, prior to the events of recent, months and years, are just going to be hollowed out, I think, and winnowed away. But, so, Carly, I'm hearing about this problem solving, and I know in the book you talk a lot about trying to have people who are closest to the problem be the ones to try to solve it. And sometimes the people who are closest to the problems are maybe closest to the customer and not at the top of the organizational food chain. And so that starts to look an awful lot like empowering people to get past their fear and to work on those problems. What's the way in which we, particularly leaders, I guess, can empower people to be problem solvers?
Well, it's such an important question. And I think it starts, Rebecca, with the desire on the part of leadership to actually tackle problems. And I know that sounds so obvious, but the reality is that the way things are, the status quo, no matter if it's unsatisfactory or not, is very powerful. Absolutely. And so the truth is that there are a lot of organizations who don't actually want to tackle problems. They want to keep things the way they are. And problems, of course, exist in every organization, in every setting, in every life, in every family. And what ends up happening so often is organizations, groups, families, teams, they work around the problems. Because in order to solve a problem, you actually have to challenge the way things are. The way things are allows the problem to exist and fester. So it starts with a recognition that I actually need to solve this problem. And in my opinion, this is what separates managers from leaders. Managers tend to do the best they can with the way things are. They work around problems. Leaders tackle problems. They run to problems. They change the way things are in order to solve those festering problems. So start with a leader has to want problems solved. Then to the point of your question, the people who understand the problem the best are the people who live with that problem every single day. And sometimes the people who live with that problem every single day are not the people way up in corporate headquarters, or maybe they're not the people in Washington, D.C. Maybe they're people sitting with customers, to your point, or sitting in a community that's having a very difficult time. So those people, the people who understand the problem best, yes, need to be empowered, to your point, supported as they problem solve. And that means given tools, given resources, given protection. When the system says, what are you doing? Why don't you just leave things alone? Yeah. And let's face it, the system says that a lot.
That's right. It's going to take courage, and they need air cover.
And leaders are there to provide all of those things: resources, tools, air cover, support, training, money, all of those things that help people actually make progress. It starts with, I actually want to get this problem solved, and therefore I want to talk to the people who understand it best.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a perfect segue into maybe something we could spend a few moments on. You present a framework for problem solving, and it's, I think, fairly straightforward, as most insights are, but difficult to execute against sometimes,
Yes.
And I wondered if you could speak a little bit to the framework that you've laid out in the book and sort of the logic behind it, as you start with, what are we trying to solve for?
Yes. So I call it the leadership framework, starting from my earlier proposition that leaders solve problems. That's what distinguishes them from managers. There's nothing wrong with being a manager, but a manager is not the same as a leader. And so this is a framework that I developed when I realized that when I was tackling problems with teams of people, one of two things would happen. Either I would get, and my team, we would get overwhelmed with the complexity of the problem. And when you get overwhelmed by complexity, either you give up too soon or you forget really important things and you leave stuff out that you really need to pay attention to. So I developed it to help myself and others overcome complexity and see everything that needed to be seen. And the second reason I developed it is because what happens, and we all know this, it's human nature, but when the going gets tough, and the going always gets tough, particularly when you're tackling a tough, festering problem, people will always revert to where they're most comfortable. And reverting to where we're most comfortable is not necessarily the most effective thing to do. So what this framework does is it's a complete holistic view of all the things you need to consider, starting with goals. What are we trying to achieve? Getting clarity about those goals is critically important. It's amazing to me how many organizations or teams start down a path without clarity or agreement about the goal they're trying to achieve or the problem they're trying to solve. They're not clear about it or they're not aligned about it. So let's get clear about the goals we're trying to achieve, the problem we're trying to resolve. The second side of the framework, it is a square, is structure and process, which is really about who's going to do what and how are they going to interact together to get it done. Structure and process tends to be where most organizations are comfortable. And so a lot of times you'll see organizations say, "Oh, I have a problem, let me reorganize." That may or may not be the right way to solve it.
One of my favorite things in an organization, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. I mean, people love structure and process, and it's an important part of thinking through who needs to do what to get this problem solved.
That's right.
The third side of the framework is metrics and results. What results are we trying to achieve? Over what time frame do we achieve them? And what are we going to measure? Measuring is critically important because what gets measured is what gets done. Whatever you're measuring in an organization is what people pay attention to because they assume it's important if you're measuring it. And so if you're measuring the wrong things or you're not measuring anything that is related to your goal and the problem you're trying to solve, you won't solve it. And then the final side is culture and behavior, which really boils down to how is it people need to behave? What values do they need to uphold as reflected in their behavior in order for us to achieve our objectives? Sometimes this is called the soft stuff, but in my experience, it is the most difficult stuff of all. And so I call it the software of problem solving. You know, you could think of process and structure and results and metrics and goals as the hardware. Behavior, culture, values, that's the software. And so do you need higher levels of teamwork, for example? Do you need higher levels of truth-telling, for example? Do you need to tolerate more mistake-making because you need more risk-taking because innovation is required? All of these are examples of culture and behavior. And so that framework is all about all the things you got to think through, making sure you don't forget any of them, making sure you don't get overwhelmed, and making sure you don't just run to where you're comfortable and forget vital pieces of the problem solving.
Yeah, no, I loved the framework, and you made a point of asking, do we have the right people on this? And your comments earlier about reverting to the things with which you're most comfortable. The same group that may have been part of the reason why we have this issue to deal with may not be the entire universe of the people you need sitting around the table, or in our case, these days, sitting in front of a Zoom camera to solve something. So,
That's right.
do you have the right resources, and do you have the right other ways of thinking that might help solve the problem? So,
absolutely right. And to your point, Rebecca, of course, people get invested in the status quo. It doesn't make them bad people. It makes them human beings. People get invested in the way things are, particularly if they have been successful with the way things are, or they feel ownership for the way things are. And so in my experience, if you're really trying to solve a problem, it is an absolute necessity to bring new people to the table, because you need people who aren't invested in the way things are and who have a different perspective about the way things could be.
I think that's exactly right. Because a lot of times, if you are used to a way of thinking about something, it doesn't allow you to be open to other ways of thinking about it. And sometimes people who are irreverent or don't know which cows are sacred sometimes can be very, very valuable.
Absolutely.
Well, we're going to take a short break for a couple of quick announcements and be back in just a minute because I'm so enjoying my conversation with you, Carly, about your new book, Find Your Way.
Can you, your team, or your company benefit from insights such as the ones provided in this podcast? They are immediately available when you join the Conference Board, a membership-based think tank that delivers trusted insights for what's ahead. Reaching across industries and geographies, we bring together our noted experts, senior executives from the world's largest companies, and nonpartisan practical research to help you address your most important business issues. Our membership packages are tailored to your organization's unique needs and budget. To learn more about our offerings, go to www.conferenceboard.org and click Join on the top bar to connect with one of our product specialists.
Hello, and welcome back to my conversation with Carly Fiorina about her new book and a lot of the great concepts in it. It's entitled Find Your Way. Carly, when I was reading the book, there was a lot throughout the entire thread of the conversation in the book around using, first of all, acknowledging your own power, and then thinking about how you will use that power as a force for good. I wondered if you could, speak a little bit about that.
Well, I think sometimes when people hear the phrase force for good, they think, solving world hunger, or, they think big, global problems. And then they tend to think, well, there's nothing I can do about that. And then they tend to say, well, there's nothing I can do. And that's a shame because everyone has the ability, the possibility, the potential to make a positive impact. And that's really what I mean when I say good. Making a positive impact means making something better, solving a problem, making someone else better, helping them unlock their potential. I believe the highest calling of a leader is to change the order of things for the better by unlocking potential in others. That is my definition of leadership. And so because I so strongly believe that, based on experience, that each of us have the capacity for leadership, the ultimate aim of a leader is to change the order of things for the better by not just unlocking their own potential, but unlocking potential in others. And when you do that, good things happen. Better things happen.
One of the stories that sticks in my mind from your book is the story of the little boy who, I think he's 4 or 5 at the time that he did this, just a tiny little thing. And he decided he was going to do something about providing meals, not for all homeless people everywhere, but for the homeless folks that he saw in his own neighborhood. And
yes.
Here's a tiny child doing that.
Yes.
I mean, really powerful.
So Austin Perrine, he, I think, is 6 now. He finished kindergarten this year. This remarkable child with a remarkable father. But one of the really important points I make in this book that Austin Perrine illustrates so beautifully is solve the problems right in front of you. Don't think that there's nothing you can do because the problems are so enormous. Don't focus on the abstract. Focus on what's right in front of you. And Austin Perrine became concerned because his father took him down. It's a fascinating story. He was watching a television show and there were polar bear cubs and the polar bear mother was killed. And he said, well, what happens to these cubs? And his father said, they become homeless. And that got them on a conversation about homeless people. And Austin wanted to see them. And so they go to somewhere close by in their neighborhood and he sees homeless people and he says, can we feed them? And so he begins to use his allowance to feed homeless people. Austin Perrine is a force for good. And of course, what happened is that force for good was multiplied because then the local Burger King got involved. And then people began to welcome Austin as someone who lifted them up in addition to providing them with a cheeseburger. And so it's an example, another analogy I use, if you drop a tiny pebble in a huge body of water, that tiny pebble nevertheless has an impact. It makes ripples. It changes things. And each of us may feel like a tiny pebble, but just like Austin Perrine, we actually can change the order of things for the better.
Yeah, it was a very powerful story. And you think, well, all the times when we as adults say, well, it's a much larger problem and we can't really solve it. It's too thorny. I don't have the power. And then you see a little child. So very powerful. So, as I listen to these concepts, and certainly the book is a great read, I wondered if you could sort of talk a little bit about how the concepts here in the book Find Your Way relate to the current work where you are leading two organizations, Unlocking Potential Foundation and the Carly Fiorina Enterprises. Can you talk about how this, sort of forms the nucleus of what you're doing in those organizations?
Yes. Well, first, this book, Find Your Way, comes out of decades of experience. And so while, yes, I hope there are powerful concepts here and tools that will help others find their way, for me, it is a condensation, a distillation, if you will, of all of the experiences I've had around how problems get solved and how leaders get developed. Not just my own experience, but the experience that I've observed across many different kinds of organizations. And so based on that experience, I know that there are loads of festering problems in civil society and nonprofits and organizations, and we need more problem solvers. We need more problem solvers everywhere, at all levels, everywhere, in every community. And so Unlocking Potential Foundation is focused on working to develop more effective problem-solving skills and more leaders in the nonprofit world, because nonprofits are dealing with incredibly difficult problems and frequently not enough resources. And so they need problem-solving skills and leaders to emerge. And Carly Fiorina Enterprises takes all of my experience in building effective, diverse teams that can make progress and solve problems in the business world, in the for-profit space. But whether it's for-profit or non-for-profit, it is all around the tools, the experience, the knowledge that I've gained over many decades of what does it take to build an effective team? What does it take to actually solve problems? What does it take to lift up and develop leaders who will help solve more problems and lift others up?
That's, I think it's always critically important, but I think to your point, we could use these in much greater numbers these days. I want to say that I've so appreciated the way in which the book is an accessible read of very important concepts. And I thought I might save my very last question to say to you that, many have watched your career and you've been an inspiration. And wondered if you had any last thoughts or final suggestions or something for us to think about as we continue to think about our own choosing of a path versus a plan, or the way in which we become leaders or empower others.
Well, at first, Rebecca, thank you for those kind words. I recently was asked to give a commencement speech, virtually, of course. And in that speech, I said that what we've all experienced during this pandemic is that we cannot control our circumstances or the events that happen around us or to us, and we cannot predict the future. But what we can do is choose who we are and how we behave. And that impacts events, and it can change the future. And so if we choose courage, if we choose humility and empathy that allows us to collaborate with others, if we choose problem solving, if we choose character and resilience, if we choose leadership, then we can impact events and we can change the future. And so sometimes people will look at my career and they'll say, well, she went from a secretary to CEO and it sounds so smooth. And no life is smooth. Mine hasn't been either. No life is without setback or disappointment. No life is without criticism, particularly if you choose to lead. And so what I would say to anyone is the most important choices you make about who you are, how you behave, what you apply your talents to, those choices are completely within your power. I mean, yes, not everyone has opportunity. And that's why we have so many problems that we must address as companies, as communities, to level the playing field so that everyone does have the potential to choose to lead, to choose to fulfill their potential. But nevertheless, the most important choices we make along our path are not about what happens to us. They are about who we choose to be and how we choose to behave, and whether we decide to help change the order of things for the better and lift others up or not.
So, Carly, I think that is a perfect way to sort of end our conversation, which, frankly, if we could have pizzas ordered, we could we'd have to have them delivered separately, but we could continue this conversation for some time, because I find the study of leadership to be such a critically important thing, particularly now. And your comments about lifting others up is such a critical definition of leadership, I think. How much are you willing to make yourself the lesser to make someone else the greater and help them see things they can't?
Yes. And the other thing that I would say about lifting people up is, our politics are so divisive and so difficult and polarized right now. And partially, I think that is because they are a win-lose game. And problem solving and leadership are never win-lose. They're always about finding common ground. They're always about win-win. They're always about progress. And that is the other thing that I think distinguishes leaders and people who are making choices to lift others up. It's not about I win, you lose. It's not about I'm always right and you're always wrong. It is about how do we collaborate together to change the order of things for the better and lift each other up in the process.
Absolutely. It is about making a bigger pie to share, I think. Well, thank you, Carly. It has been a distinct pleasure to talk about the concepts in your brand new book, Find Your Way. And I thank you very much for carving out some time and to share this. And I look forward to future conversations and future books. And I hope there are more in the pipeline.
Well, thank you so much, Rebecca. I've really enjoyed our conversation. You ask wonderful and insightful questions, and not everyone does.
Well, thank you. I'm going to cling to that because sometimes, it's really easy though when you have somebody who's thoughtful, somebody who's got some great material and a great new book, and it's really just about giving an opportunity. And I know that the folks who are listening today will be the beneficiaries of your insights. So thank you, Carly.
Thank you, Rebecca. All the best.
Thank you. So let me just thank all of the folks who are listening to this podcast, and I would encourage you to subscribe to the entire show. And so if you enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe to Off the Shelf Book Discussion Podcast Series, or take a look at our entire catalog of podcast programming from the Conference Board. You'll need to visit our website, which is www.conference-board.org/podcasts. Thanks again for listening. Talk to you soon.